Hello, this is Nick and welcome to part 3 of my entry into the Great Guitar Build-Off 2021. In the first episode, I introduced the concept behind my build. I'm trying to reverse engineer a guitar designed by Rick Turner, the Model 1. I showed you some of the jigs that I needed to make in order to create the body of the guitar, which is radiused on both sides. And in part 2, I showed you how I went about making the neck. In this part, I'm going to show you more about how I made the body for the main guitar and show you developments on the prototype which I made a few weeks ago prior to this build. I've now flattened the inside face of the top cap, the maple cap. So this is actually going to be fitting this way round on the guitar. And I've also put some indexing holes in each of the 4 corners, as well as a couple of indexing holes in places which won't show when the guitar is finished. I've done the same thing to the mahogany base, and here we've now got a template that is indexed with pins on this face. I put a radius on the body blank now. What I've done is I've just radiused this area here, leaving flat spots at either end, which means that I can hold the body blank stably down whilst routing out anything that I need to route from the outside. Because the wood is becoming very thin on the maple side, and I'll just flip that over, so you can see we've only got a few millimeters of thickness on the maple side. I lost my nerve a little bit and decided not to completely round this over. So I'm going to have to blend this in a little bit by hand. But I've got rid of most of the material. But if I went any further, I would start to get completely through the maple cap. And that's not what I want. I'm hoping that I'll be able to have a few millimeters around the outside that will serve as a faux binding. If that doesn't look good, and there's a possibility that it won't, because the shape of the body is going to mean that the binding is going to change size. So if it doesn't look good, then I'll just have to bind it with some plastic. Whilst the guitar's still in two halves, there's a few things that need doing. So I've routed out some weight relief with these chambers here. This circle will house the pickup. There'll be a special pickup holder that goes in here. We have more weight relief here, and then this is part of the cavity for the electronics. If we look at it from the other side, you can see that we've got this radius, and this is what the cavity will look like. I haven't quite finished it yet because I've got to put an indentation around the outside to put a cover over the top so that it's flush with the outside. Now the cavity for the electronics has to be continued onto the other side. So I've put this template on the inside face of the maple cap, and I need to route out a little bit here to leave perhaps 5 millimeters or so, which is about enough depth to put the volume, tone, etc., the pots through to the top. And the problem with this is that towards the center, towards the midline, the guitar is, the cap is quite thick. It's nearly 20 millimeters thick, but at the edges, it's only a few millimeters thick. So I need to find a way of routing out this cavity using a radius that matches the surface radius. So to do this, I've adapted this jig that I use for thicknessing bodies, and I've put a radius along here. This is 600 millimeters, 24 inches, and it's a concave radius, so that if I put my router on this board here, so as I route the electronics cavity, I should be following the same radius as on the front of the guitar. this jig has worked in principle. It has allowed me to produce a deeper route in the center of the body compared to the outside of the body. But it's very difficult to use because the bits that I've got are not really long enough to get inside. I think it's because my templates are very thick. But apart from that, I think it's worked, and I'm going to probably just find another way to just get this a little bit thinner, because I really don't want to damage the front. So I think I'll find a sanding method to see if I can just get a little bit thinner. Here is the two halves. They've been radiused. A space for the pickup has been made. We've got some holes for the potentiometers and the controls. There's one more to do, but I'll do that later. Still needs to be sanded. This is the back. The back has got space for the electronics. And of course, it still needs to be cut out. So we'll put this on the bandsaw later, and then it'll start to take shape. The control cavity is now done. I forgot to film the last part, but routing a little ledge around the outside so that I can fit a cover that is flush with the surface was a little bit difficult. What I did in the end was to take some thin plywood, a couple of pieces that were thin enough to just bend around the contour, which gives me enough clearance over the top to run a trim router bit so that I could just take off a little bit around here. This is the back of the guitar. So it's been radiused, and we have an indentation here for the electronics cavity cover. I had to go around with a chisel to make sure that the ledge here is deep enough for the cover of the electronics cavity, and decided to use some tortoise shell plastic, and I've cut out a circle, and it fits reasonably well. I had to use a heat gun to try to bend it to conform to the radius on the back, but that now fits in quite nicely. I'm now going to cut out the outline of the guitar. So using the indexing pins, I've put on the template. So this is the rear side of the top cap. I've drilled a few holes around the outside just to help as I go around with the bandsaw. It'll help me go around corners because my bandsaw is a very lightweight one. And yeah, it'll start looking like a guitar soon. So I have cut out the two halves of the body on the bandsaw, but I've left a lot of material around the outside, and that was because it was quite difficult to cut, because the back of the guitar is radiused and I didn't want to undercut it. So there's probably too much material for me to sand easily to get it to the right size. So I'm going to use the router and the template, but I'm just going to take small chunks at a time so I don't tear out too much material. So I'm going to have to step up through various different bits, different size bits, until I can get through the whole body. I've also put the same amount of tape on the bearing in each case, because I would like to just make it slightly oversized so that when I join the two halves together, if they don't match perfectly, then I'll be able to sand them without making the guitar too small. So the guitar is starting to come together. See the maple cap, everything is nicely indexed, and from the side need a little bit of extra work just to get it all to fit together nicely, but yeah, making progress.